The bright lights of the Manhattan skyline twinkled like a million cameras flashing in the night. Inside a grand studio at a well-known television network, producers buzzed around, preparing for what they hoped would be a ratings blockbuster. The evening's guest? Pam Bondi, the Attorney General of the United States under President Donald Trump. Her invitation to the Jordan Calloway show had raised eyebrows across the political spectrum. Calloway was known for his aggressive, no-holds-barred interview style. A staunch progressive with a deep disdain for the Trump administration, he had made a career out of skewering conservative guests. But Bondi wasn't one to back down from a fight. As the black SUV carrying the Attorney General pulled up outside the studio, a small crowd of protesters chanted with signs reading, "Resist," and "No fascists in government." Pam Bondi, impeccably dressed in a navy blue blazer and crisp white blouse, stepped out, unfazed. Her years in politics had hardened her to criticism. With a confident stride, she walked past the crowd, flanked by 2 security personnel. Inside the green room, an anxious assistant approached her. "Ms. Bondi, just a heads up. Calloway is really looking to put you on the spot tonight. He's been going after everyone in the administration lately." Pam smirked. "Good. Let's give him a show." Minutes later, she was led onto the brightly lit stage. The audience erupted in a mix of cheers and boos, just as expected. Jordan Calloway, a tall man with slicked-back hair and an air of smug self-assurance, leaned back in his chair, a smirk playing on his lips. Well, he said, drawing out the words for dramatic effect. "Madam Attorney General, welcome to the show." Pam Bondi smiled. "Thank you, Jordan. I appreciate the invitation." Calloway clasped his hands together. "Oh, I bet you do. So, let's get right into it, shall we? The Trump administration, you are part of what many would call the most controversial, most corrupt presidency in modern American history. How do you sleep at night?" The audience gasped at the bluntness of the question. Some laughed, others clapped. Pam, however, remained unshaken. She tilted her head slightly and let the silence stretch just long enough to unsettle Calloway. Then, with a cool, collected smile, she responded, "Jordan, I sleep just fine. Probably better than you after the amount of half-truths and misinformation you peddle on this show." A murmur ran through the audience. Calloway blinked, momentarily caught off guard. But he recovered quickly. "Oh, I see where this is going," he said. "You're going to try and flip this on me." Classic deflection. "But let's stick to the facts, shall we?" He picked up a note card. "You've defended policies that many consider to be anti-immigrant, anti-woman, anti-democratic. Do you think history will remember you kindly?" Pam leaned forward slightly. "Jordan, I'm here to discuss facts, not your narrative. You say anti-immigrant. I say enforcing the law. You say anti-woman. I say standing up for women's rights, including the right to personal safety and due process. And as for anti-democratic, I believe in the Constitution, something that many of your guests conveniently ignore." The crowd shifted uneasily. Calloway narrowed his eyes. "So, you're saying your administration is spotless?" Pam's smile grew. "I'm saying that if you really cared about facts, you'd ask real questions instead of cherry-picking talking points for entertainment value." The audience gasped again, and for the first time, Calloway looked slightly rattled. But he wasn't done yet. "Okay," he said, his smirk returning. "Let's talk about real questions. Let's talk about your role in shielding Trump from legal scrutiny. Let's talk about the ethics of your office. Let's talk about—" Pam held up a hand, stopping him. "Oh, we will, Jordan. But let's also talk about something you don't want to, your own hypocrisy. Because I've done my homework on you." The crowd leaned forward. The real fight was about to begin. A hush fell over the audience. Jordan Calloway's trademark smirk faltered just slightly, but he quickly masked it with mock curiosity. "Oh, my hypocrisy? This should be good," he said, leaning back with exaggerated confidence. Pam Bondi met his gaze with an unwavering stare. "You sit here night after night, lecturing conservatives about ethics, morality, and democracy. You paint yourself as the fearless watchdog of truth. But let's talk about your record, Jordan. The crowd murmured, intrigued. Calloway chuckled. Please enlighten me. Pam reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a few neatly folded pages. She unfolded them and held them up. Let's start with this. You claim to stand for women's rights, but just last year, your own female producers accused you of fostering a toxic work environment. Multiple claims of verbal abuse, intimidation, and even underpaying your female staff compared to your male employees. A ripple of shock coursed through the audience. Calloway's smirk twitched. That's a mischaracterization, he shot back. There were internal disagreements, but no official complaints. Pam tilted her head. Interesting, because I have here a report from an independent labor rights group that says otherwise. She placed the document on the table between them. And you can check it. These are publicly available records. Calloway's nostrils flared slightly, but he forced a laugh. Nice try. I see what you're doing, changing the subject. The people watching at home want answers about you, not me. Pam crossed her arms. Oh, don't worry. I'm happy to answer any real questions. But first, let's continue. Since you love calling out supposed government corruption, let's talk about how your network, the very one that signs your paycheck, received millions in government subsidies while simultaneously attacking small businesses for taking COVID relief loans. A collective who swept across the audience. Calloway cleared his throat. We report the news, Pam. That's our job. Pam leaned in, her voice calm but sharp. Then let's be clear, you report what suits your agenda. You cherry-pick facts, spin them for sensationalism, and conveniently ignore inconvenient truths when they apply to your side. Calloway's jaw tightened. He could feel the momentum shifting. He was supposed to be the one tearing into his guest, but somehow Bondi had turned the tables. He needed to regain control. All right, he said, forcing a tight smile. Since you're so eager to expose bias, let's bring it back to the real issue. You're part of an administration that has been accused of undermining democracy. The courts have ruled against the president's policies multiple times. Are you denying that? Pam didn't blink. I'm saying that rulings don't always equal justice. Just like media coverage doesn't always equal truth. We live in a country where laws are debated, challenged, and upheld through constitutional processes. But people like you prefer to act as judge, jury, and executioner before the facts are even established. The audience sat in stunned silence. Even Calloway had to acknowledge that Bondi wasn't rattled. If anything, she seemed to be enjoying herself. He exhaled sharply. Okay, Pam, let's cut to the chase. Do you honestly believe history will look back at this administration and say, yes, these were the good guys? Pam Bondi smiled, leaned back, and answered without hesitation. History will remember those who stood firm, who didn't cave to mob outrage, and who defended this nation's founding principles even when it was unpopular. And that's why I sleep just fine at night, Jordan. The real question is, do you? The audience exploded, some with applause, others with outrage. Calloway, for the first time in his career, was visibly thrown off his game. And Pam Bondi? She simply waited, letting the weight of her words settle. Jordan Calloway had built his career on aggressive takedowns. He was a master of interruption, a king of sound bites. But tonight, things weren't going as planned. He shifted in his chair, gripping his no cards a little tighter. Pam, let's get real. You say history will remember those who stood firm, but what you call standing firm, others call enabling authoritarianism. Pam raised an eyebrow. Authoritarianism? Interesting choice of words, Jordan. Who's the one trying to shut down opposing views? Who's the one branding everyone they disagree with as dangerous or extremist? It's certainly not conservatives who are silencing free speech on campuses, shutting down dissenting voices online, or threatening businesses for having the wrong political stance. The crowd reacted with a mix of applause and murmurs. Calloway tried to interject, but Pam wasn't finished. You and your network love to push this narrative that Trump and his administration are some kind of existential threat to democracy. But let's talk about what democracy actually is. It's not a curated news cycle designed to manipulate people's emotions. It's not about silencing opposition through corporate censorship. And it's definitely not about using the legal system as a weapon against political enemies. Calloway scoffed. Oh, please, spare me the victim speech. The courts have ruled against Trump's policies because they were unconstitutional. Take the so-called Muslim ban, even the Supreme Court had to step in. Pam nodded. Ah, so now you respect the courts when it suits you. Let's not forget that the Supreme Court ultimately upheld the travel restrictions, citing national security concerns. but you conveniently leave that part out. Calloway clenched his jaw. She wasn't just countering his arguments, she was exposing the double standards in real time. Pam continued, you call it a Muslim ban, but let's look at the facts. The policy affected only a handful of countries, not all Muslim-majority nations. It was based on security risks identified by the Obama administration, yet you act like Trump pulled it out of thin air. Funny how that part never makes it into your talking points. The audience was hooked now. Even those who had come expecting a Bondi takedown were watching with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Calloway exhaled sharply. Look, Pam, let's cut through the spin. You're here defending a president who has been impeached twice, accused of obstructing justice, and who openly attacks the press. Pam smirked. And yet he's still standing. Twice acquitted. And despite all the media efforts to destroy him, millions of Americans still support him. Maybe, just maybe, it's because they see through the nonsense. Calloway leaned forward, voice dripping with sarcasm. You mean they believe the alternative reality Fox News feeds them? Pam laughed softly. Oh, so now we're attacking an entire news network? Isn't it funny how people like you claim to fight against disinformation, but only target conservative outlets? I don't recall you calling out CNN when they had to retract multiple false reports about the Russia hoax. I don't recall you criticizing MSNBC when they pushed blatant misinformation about the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. But sure, we're the problem. The audience gasped. Pam had just brought up a topic that mainstream media had largely tried to bury. Calloway's expression darkened. You really want to go there? Pam smiled. I already did. For the first time in his career, Jordan Calloway was outmaneuvered on his own show. Jordan Calloway's face tightened. He wasn't used to losing control of an interview. His job was to put conservative guests on the defensive, make them stumble, expose their flaws. But Pam Bondi was turning his own tactics against him, and the audience could feel the shift. He needed to regain the upper hand. So, Pam, Calloway said, forcing a smile, you bring up Hunter Biden's laptop like it's some grand conspiracy. Maybe you should focus on actual corruption, like the Trump family using the presidency to enrich themselves. Pam chuckled. Oh, you mean like Hunter flying on Air Force Two with Joe Biden to China and coming back with $1 billion deal? That kind of corruption? The crowd reacted audibly. Gasps, murmurs, a few scattered claps. Calloway's face hardened. That's been debunked. Pam shook her head. No, it hasn't. That's the thing, Jordan. You and the media want people to believe it's been debunked. But simply repeating, that's not true over and over doesn't make something false. Americans aren't stupid. Calloway's voice rose slightly. I'm not here to debate right-wing conspiracy theories. I'm here to hold power accountable. Pam leaned forward, her tone calm but piercing. Are you? Or are you just protecting the power that aligns with your worldview? Because from where I'm sitting, you're not holding anyone accountable. You're running interference for one political side while pretending to be an objective journalist. The audience murmured again. Calloway glanced at his producers, who were watching nervously from behind the cameras. He was losing the room. Pam continued, her voice unwavering. You and your colleagues spent years pushing the Russia collusion hoax. Turns out there was no collusion. You downplayed the violence in American cities, calling riots mostly peaceful protests. You ignored the Hunter Biden laptop story until it was undeniable. And now you're sitting here, trying to lecture me on credibility. Calloway's face was red now. Pam, you're dodging the question. Pam didn't let him finish. No, Jordan. I'm answering the questions you won't even ask. The audience erupted. Some cheering, others booing, but all fully engaged. Pam sat back, letting the moment hang in the air. Calloway, flustered, shuffled his note cards, searching for a way to recover. But the damage was done. He had invited Pam Bondi onto his show expecting to humiliate her. Instead, she had exposed him, and the entire nation was watching. Jordan Calloway's usual smugness had evaporated. He had invited Pam Bondi onto his show, expecting to trap her in a barrage of rapid-fire accusations. But now he was the one struggling to defend himself. The audience, which had started off as largely supportive of Calloway, was now split. Some stunned by Pam's sharp comebacks, others clearly impressed by her ability to take control. Calloway cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. All right, Pam, let's step back. Let's say, hypothetically, that everything you've said tonight is valid. Why is it, then, that so many Americans believe the Trump administration was corrupt? That it actively harmed democracy? Pam nodded as if she had been waiting for this question. Because people like you tell them to believe it. The audience murmured again. Calloway looked irritated. That's a convenient excuse. Pam smiled. No, it's reality. The media no longer reports the news, it shapes it. It creates villains and heroes based on an agenda, not facts. And the American people? They're catching on. Calloway leaned forward, desperation creeping into his voice. So, you're saying you're the victim? That conservatives are the victims? That the Trump administration was just misunderstood? Pam shook her head. No. I'm saying that every time someone like me or anyone in this administration speaks, we're shouted down, labeled, and smeared. Not because we're wrong, but because people like you are terrified of Americans hearing the other side. The audience burst into mixed reactions again. Calloway was sweating now. Pam continued, you don't want debate. You don't want truth. You want control. And you're losing it. Silence. Even Calloway, who had made a career out of talking over his guests, found himself speechless. Pam sat back, crossing her arms. So, Jordan, I'll leave you with this. You can keep doing what you're doing. Keep spinning. Keep pushing narratives. But sooner or later, the American people are going to tune you out. A beat passed. Then an eruption of applause louder than anything all night. Calloway, jaw tight, turned to the camera. We'll be right back. The screen faded to black. Pam Bondi had won. And everyone knew it.